Hi, so welcome to the Clarity Spotlight, and I'm really, really pleased to introduce you to Jenny Robson, founder of Roots and Branches. So tell me a little bit about you and your business, Jenny.
So I founded Roots and Branches in 2015, having previously worked for the government. Let me start by telling you what Roots and Branches does. We are a consultancy service for UK small businesses that want to export or set up an international office overseas. So we do two things: Roots, which helps people to export, and that's everything to do with routes to market, and how to achieve a thriving overseas business through different routes to market. And then Branches, which is about actually setting up a presence overseas. And we do all the work via partners. We do the legal work. But apart from that, we do all the work on your overseas strategy, how to have a presence in another market, how to make sure that your team is functioning well in another market. So things like expat packages, insights into cultural difference and how to perform well amongst the different culture, all those kind of things, to make sure that you've got a thriving overseas branch office. So that's the business. I came to the business a little bit by accident, a little bit intentionally. I previously worked for the UK government trade department, which at the time was called UK Trade and Investment, but it's now called the Department of International Trade. I worked in their embassy, in the British Embassy in The Hague in the Netherlands, for nearly 3 years as a trade advisor, helping UK companies to specifically look at doing business in the Netherlands with Dutch companies. From there, I had the opportunity to move to Singapore, and at the same time, the UK government decided to shift its strategy from helping UK companies primarily through the UKTI to helping them more widely through UKTI and a network of international chambers of commerce that would be accredited and linked to the British Chambers of Commerce. So it was a really exciting programme called the Overseas Business Network Initiative. The person that comes up with labels for these things really needs to get a new job, I think, but I'm not very good at it. But it makes us all laugh with all these acronyms. I went out to Singapore and I joined the British Chamber of Commerce in Singapore, and I headed up their trade team implementing the OBNI initiative. And that meant in practice that I established a trade team for the first time, and I worked with the British companies that were already out there, plus all the ones that were entering Singapore, to really understand the Singapore market, to understand Singapore in the context of the wider Southeast Asian markets. There's a lot of cross-trade that happens between Singapore and places like Hong Kong, Thailand, Indonesia. So it's a really kind of quite exciting, bigger market if you can look at one in the context of many. So we did lots and lots of work with lots of different sectors of UK companies, looking at Singapore. And after 3 years, I had the opportunity to move to India. And that's when I parted ways with the government and decided that I wanted to set up my own business, because I felt that more could be done to work over the long term with UK companies, and that more could be done to help them address some of the fears that they had around exporting, and to make some of the connections that were previously a little bit disjointed. Lots of the government services did one specific task and then you were passed to somebody else to do another specific task. So a lot of the feedback I was getting from the companies I was working with was, it's disjointed and piecemeal, and we're not really sure what to do between there and there, and whether we can ask this person these kind of questions or whether we should only ask that person. And they were quite confused, and that had the ultimate effect of them just deciding, export's more hassle than it's worth. which for me completely defeated the object. So Roots and Branches was born out of a desire to take it back to basics, to work out what were the core principles that people needed to understand to export. And over the last 3 years, I've been distilling that process down into what I now have as a 7-step program. So we look at 7 really clear steps to get you from never exporting before to being a thriving export business in one or multiple markets around the world. And I'm in the process at the moment of writing this up into a book, and also creating a course so that you can go through that 7-step process individually in your own time, and then following that you can have me on a one-to-one basis to understand the more technical aspects of specific markets, or ask me any questions, or really get into the nitty-gritty exciting export stuff once you've got a grounding in the principles. So that's it really. That's where we're at now.
Fab. And my door keeps clicking, so I'm going to take that moment to click it shut because it's annoying me while I try to concentrate there. So what is it about export for you that is so important, do you think, to small businesses? And also you've got quite a big, strong why that drives you for your business as a whole.
I am really fascinated by the way that we are all connected together globally, and how some of the biggest challenges that we face now as humanity are not country-specific challenges. For example, a shortage of water or environmental impacts of the way we are living. These are issues that are going to affect everybody across the board, regardless of where we're positioned in the world or which society we were born into. And they're all issues that different companies in different countries are attempting to tackle. So my sort of bigger why is, how can I connect those different companies to better work together to find more sustainable, longer term solutions that benefit the wider population outside of national borders. So a lot of the companies I work with have really sort of exciting missions to solve different problems. One lady springs to mind whenever I get asked this question. She's because she works in a topic that nobody wants to talk about. So she actually she works to help with sanitary waste for females, and she specifically helps to work with young people who don't necessarily have access to good sanitary solutions, and that can have all sorts of negative effects on them dropping out of education and right through to severe health issues and sexual health problems, and it goes quite deep. But what she's created is a really tiny little bag that decomposes so that you can discreetly get rid of all your sanitary waste and keep it with you until it's appropriate to dispose of it, if necessary, without the stigma of carrying around dirty sanitary products. And she also does sort of a lot of research and investment into sanitary solutions itself and how best to tackle the wider issues. So that's a really sort of interesting cause-based company that I've worked with in the past. There's also a gentleman that works in cold storage solutions, making sure that workwear is safe for cold environments, because again, there's been a massive increase in the number of cold environments that have been built so that we can have fresh fruit and seasonal vegetables regardless of what season it is anywhere in the world, and we can all access tropical fruits, you know, even if we live somewhere that can only grow apples. But with that comes the environment to keep them fresh, and if you're not clothed adequately, you can face serious health repercussions and have serious industrial accidents. So I've been working with a company that have really good solutions to keep work environments safe in cold temperatures. another company that works on the doors for those environments to make sure that they're sealed properly and that there's no environmental leaks, because refrigerants and other chemicals are used in this process and that can have environmental impacts. So they're commercial organisations and they operate commercially. They're not all charities, but they are all contributing to solving big problems, and so they're the sort of companies that I like to get involved in. Yeah, I could talk about a million other examples.
I know. I was sat here thinking, we're trying to go on the Clarity bit, but maybe we'll have a separate interview, because I know that while you and I have been working together, you've done the Clarity Positive Change program, and we're just about we're part 5 of 8 of Do Delegate or Ditch at the moment. And on more than one occasion, we have been in tears as we share some of the changing work that you're doing, particularly with some young girls in India at the moment. People, the difference you're making to people's lives, in not just in the work you do, but just by you being you. So I highly recommend anybody who's watching this video who has even thought about exporting, but also knows they have a bigger vision to make a bigger difference in the world, talk to this lady. So we're talking all about clarity today. Why do you think clarity is so important?
I think clarity is vital to enabling you to make the biggest impact you possibly can in the world. That sounds really cliche, but I genuinely believe it. I believe that if you get clarity, you can make better decisions, and then you can determine how best to spend your time. And it's where we focus our time and our attention that brings and reaps the biggest rewards. So unless you have clarity over what you're trying to achieve, you'll never really make a big impact on the world. That's actually the first step of my 7-part export program, is about establishing what your values are, and step 2 is about establishing what your vision is. And these two together are really fundamental, and are both massively linked to clarity, because without the clarity over what's important to you, you will never understand your values. Yeah. And without the clarity over which direction you're heading in, you'll never be able to visualize and achieve goals. So you need to understand your intrinsic values and how that fits with the vision of what you're trying to achieve. And in order to do that, you need some clarity. So how do you get clarity, I guess, is the next question. Well, that's when you work with Cheryl, but
or Jenny.
Beyond that, it's about understanding your decision-making process, and I think that differs for everybody. I've spoken to Cheryl a lot about balance, about trying to create balance between being a new mum, owning my own business, living in a foreign country that doesn't have running water and sometimes doesn't have electricity and quite often loses its internet in the middle of my calls. But all of those things can be overcome if you have some clarity about how you're going to spend your time, what's going to affect you and what's not, and how you're going to balance your reactions to each of these things. So I think it's vital to spend some time looking within at what's preventing you from being clear about your intention at the moment, and how can you address those things. And just actually putting out there what it is that you do care about and want to achieve, no matter how scary or audacious or frankly naive they sound, because to be honest, all my big dreams I've been called naive, I've been called ridiculous, I've been called, you'll never be able to change the world. Well, I'm never going to change the world if I don't try to. So that's my approach.
And one of the things I want to pick up on, because I know we use the word values, and some people, when I've worked with them, they can't work out, but it's basically things that are important to us. It's like things that matter, that they pull on our heartstrings, they frustrate us, or they bring us great joy, but they are really important, so that we have to have those things in our lives.
Yeah, I differentiate between values and ethics in the beginning of my book. I'm just going to flip to got a distinction. To thrive is to prosper and flourish, and to have values that allow you to prosper and flourish is what distinguishes your values from your ethics. And then we go through how you sort of determine what values enable you to prosper and flourish, and which don't, which are ethical things that almost measure you measure against your ethics, but your values are intrinsic.
So yeah, absolutely. So for you, well, actually, we're going to be doing decision making next on the next module, and that's something definitely for me when I'm working with people writing their books or just getting clarity of what they want is making a decision. It is whether that decision is inclusive of our needs, our family's needs, our clients' needs, our community, and then ultimately the world. And I don't believe that any of the decisions stick unless they're inclusive of the whole system. They have a very short time span, so we may make that decision and we might deprive ourselves of sleep for a few nights to get a project done, but we can't sustain that on a long-term basis. And likewise, if we do things that are just quick, easy, and cheaper for us, but they impact the planet, again, maybe over a longer period of time outside our own lifespan, it will have an impact. And I'm really excited to be working with you to be able to spread the word about how you can help people cross those borders. So for you, clarity's like what?
Clarity for me is power. It's a feeling that spreads from my head to my gut and back again, where I feel empowered that the decision I made is the right decision, and that yes, it probably will have some repercussions and some impacts on other people that I've not necessarily considered, but if I'm really clear about my intent, it's a decision that I don't have to justify to anybody else. So it's not an emotion, it stops being an emotional decision and starts being something very logical and actionable. And I think that's when we start to move away from what's our values and what's driving us emotionally to what can we make clear decisions on and develop a more business perspective and drive transactions forwards. So you need both.
And clarity for you is power and empower, and it's a power that comes from your head to your gut. Is there anything else about that power?
Sometimes for me it's a spark, it's a quick decision that just happens. Sometimes I have to sit with a sort of uncertain feeling in my gut for 3 or 4 days, sometimes longer, whilst my head comes up with a million different solutions to how I might solve that problem. And I do this for my clients as well. Quite often I'll sit with a client's problem in my heart or in my gut, and then suddenly think, oh, that's how that's going to help. So there's one going on at the moment. A brilliant toy inventor has developed a really fun card game called Quirk that I urge you to go have. It's suitable for families or for adults. If you play it as an adult, you can have a fantastic time pretending to be a supermodel, and you can ask both me and Cheryl about that later.
It's an amazing game. I highly recommend you want to get back to some basic family fun.
But the founder, Emma, at the moment is facing the challenge of how to get into one of the major department stores in the country, and whether she should approach one department store at a time or whether she should go for a whole approach to multiple, and where to even start looking for connections. And that's all the kind of work that we do quite frequently to help people grow their businesses. So I was sitting with how best to use my existing connections that weren't quite in the right department to leverage on those relationships to get sort of an inroad into some of the toy specific buyers in these big stores. and then sort of sent her a flurry of emails as all the ideas came back to me. She sent me quite an amusing response this morning, just in keeping with the game quirk. So yeah, it's nice, but sometimes your decisions don't happen immediately, and sometimes my process with clients is really fast, and sometimes it's a little bit slower. But that, I think, is part of the benefits of it and the process. I'm very much a believer in processes.
Yeah. So clarity for you, sometimes it's a spark, and sometimes it's a process, and sometimes it takes longer, and it's a power, and it's empowering. So that's what's happening for you now with clarity, and you were doing that for your clients already. And when you came to me, obviously new baby, because how old's Charlotte now?
She's 9 months this week.
9 months. So 9 months old this week, and living in India, like you say, not always running water or electric, and a first-time mum. And so whilst you were doing all that wonderful work for your clients and helping them get huge clarity and success with their exporting business, that wasn't quite what was happening for you at the time when we first spoke. So what was Overwhelm like for you when we first met?
Complete lack of clarity on priorities. A lot of guilt about where I was spending my time. So when I was prioritizing my clients, I felt guilty that I was perhaps neglecting Charlotte. When I was prioritizing Charlotte, I felt guilty that I was neglecting my clients. My husband didn't even get a look in. The gym was some sort of distant fantasy land that, existed only in dreams. And my body reflected that. Food became which pizza menu is fastest to hand, rather than something that nourishes you and you enjoy. And I just generally become a little bit disillusioned with which direction I was heading in and why, and what was really important to me and what wasn't. And I knew that I wanted to restructure my business. I knew that I had, prior to working with Cheryl, I had multiple different offerings. It wasn't quite as clear cut as roots and branches. So in the course of working with Cheryl as well, I've rebranded the business. I've developed the course. I've started writing the book. So I've made sort of major leaps in lots of different areas. I've kept Charlotte alive for 9 months.
And thriving.
Despite lack of sleep and other things. Yep, I've invested in myself and my body and my ability to access the gym. It's not a fantasy land, it does exist. I've been to yoga classes. I've had a nice time exploring who I am and where my peace of mind comes from and what settles me and what unsettles me, how important breathing is, the role of donuts in my life. Had all sorts of interesting conversations. I could talk for a long time. I'm conscious that this should be a short, snappy video to inspire people.
So, I've got a pattern of nothing I do is ever short and snappy. I haven't worked that one out yet. So, you've already covered the question I was going to ask you is what's happening now. So you've got gym. So what is it that worked for you to gain clarity?
The first bit was realising that I can't help anybody else until I start helping myself. And I think that's something we're all quite guilty of. We all often put others before ourselves and neglect our own basic needs. And that's just not sustainable. And you're absolutely no use to the global issues if you've not prioritised yourself and your own business and your own life. So the first bit was getting right back down to basics and re-looking at what my values are, re-looking at what I was grateful for, what was working well, what wasn't working well, how we could start to bring some of the patterns of what was working well to tackle the problems in the what wasn't working well. And that's the sort of process that we've been through. till now I feel sort of quite abundant in that most things are working really well, and I'm quite happy and can't shut up and should try and make this more concise.
You don't need to apologise for that. Well, I wanted to just double check. Can you remember the date that we started working together?
I can find out because it's on my calendar. We were talking about the roles of physical objects as well to keep us, to give clarity, and I was saying that I really liked having a physical calendar. I'll tell you exactly when because you'll be on the calendar. Well, you're right at the beginning in the 29th of January.
So 29th of January, one of your first outcome was to find your sense of humour again, because you felt like you're taking everything really seriously and you're irritable and I don't know the right word, but short-tempered with Scott, and like you say, the guilt was playing on your mind. And now when we spoke just earlier today in your last session is that you've got, it's back, the sense of humour, and you feel like you've got an abundance of time. So it's a lovely place to see you. But what's the one thing you wish you'd known before all this, before clarity? If anything.
I think it's just a recognition that I wasn't the only one experiencing this. That it's quite normal for people to experience overwhelm, and it's quite normal for us to sit and dwell on it for a little while and not really know how to tackle it. So if I could urge anybody to do anything, it would be acknowledge the fact that you are in overwhelm and start speaking to people about how to solve it. It be that Cheryl or somebody else, it doesn't really matter. I think Cheryl can offer you a lot of help very quickly, but the aim is that you recognise that you're not the only person going through this, and you start to do something about it, because as soon as you put you back at the centre of your world, you can make such a bigger difference for lots of people and for yourself, and just generally be happy and have a sense of humour instead of being miserable.
It is lovely watching. I'm very honoured to watch your transformation. Something I just want to share as we close up now, because it's to be a half an hour call, is one thing that occurred to me when you said you booked it in January. We'd actually spoken in the middle of last year, but you had a gut feeling, intuition, whatever it was, and you said to me, I want to wait till after I've had the baby, because you were pregnant at the time when we spoke. So you knew somewhere intuitively to do this afterwards. And so the other thing I want to just leave people with is to trust yourself. Definitely talk to people like Jenny's saying, but if you do keep talking to people and it doesn't get any better, then speak to people like Jenny and ourselves who are coaches, people who can ask you specific questions to really put your attention on the stuff that's going to give you the clarity that you need right now, because that is the bit, the magic can happen. And I'm so proud of you in 6 months, just the success stories. I mean, we spend about 20 minutes, half an hour just acknowledging everything that's going well.
Yeah,
the last call.
I think that's one of the most empowering parts of the program, that in the first session, because you always get questions in advance, what's going well, what's not going well, and a series of others to think about so that you're prepared for the session. And in the first week, I could write a list as long as my arm for the what's not going right and why am I so miserable kind of section. But I was really struggling to be grateful for what was going well. And now it takes me, I could spend about 3 hours writing what's going well, and then it takes me all on to try and recall something to say for the what's not going so well bit. So I think that's just, I don't think there's a better testimonial than that to the process.
And I know that those who don't know me well will know that we get people into physically celebrating their changes, and that you reckon I should have a video with the dances on. So we're just going to leave you with our celebration dance, that when things go well. And I hope you're going to join me, because I'm going to look silly on my own. So thank you very much, Jenny. I'll put the links in the video later. Contact Jenny if you want to export. If you're in overwhelm, talk to somebody. Don't stay there, because you matter, and you've got more to add to the world with clarity. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.